Welcome to Geopolitics in Conflict show. Very excited to be with you. But we are excited because of our guest. You all remember last time when I mentioned to you when we did the live stream, I mentioned to you that the one of you asked a question, some specific question about the finance aspect of it, and I said wait till we have our interview with a specific person, one that is a friend of mine, and usually you guys know me, I don't use this term loosely. A good friend of mine, and also someone I trust. And by the way, he is right here. So let's welcome Richard Turrin. He's known as Rick. That's how I call him. He and I, we call each other by first name. Can you please introduce Rick to our audience?
Absolutely. So I'd like to say thank you to Richard, first of all, because Richard, you were actually one of our first guests on the show about 3 years ago. You were one of our first guests, and your expertise has actually only become more and more relevant as we've progressed over the last few years, especially with a lot of what's happened in the global economy, de-dollarization. Every single country or every single major power is trying out a central bank digital currency. So much is changing. We have Enbridge, we have all of these alternative to SWIFT payment systems that we've got going on. And so your expertise has only gotten more and more relevant. Rich Turrin is actually the number 4th ranked global fintech influencer on the prestigious Analytica ranking, and an award-winning executive previously heading fintech teams at IBM, following a 20-year career in investment banking. He wrote the book. He is the best-selling author of Cashless, China's Digital Currency Revolution, and Innovation Lab Excellence.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Richard Turrin, for being here with us again.
All right, let's get into it here. It's because we have a lot of questions for you, Rick, and really your insights for all of us, because we wanted to learn about what's going on. First of all, let's start with, we'd like to have your insight as to where you see the current global economic order.
Oh, that's okay. So hello, everyone out there. And thank you for listening in. It's a pleasure to be back. And I love all of you because, David, your listeners are so inquisitive. And I'm going to start by saying that during this podcast, if anything I say makes you happy, unhappy, or you want to comment, reach out to me on LinkedIn, on Twitter, through my Substack newsletter. We'll talk about that more later. But let's answer some, but I love you all and thank you. I got so many questions the last time. Where are we going and why? And the answer is we are heading to a new multipolar currency world, meaning a world where the dollar still has a tremendous relevance, but where it has to share the financial landscape with other countries. And that's all coming part because of sanctions, war. We live in a tremendous period of war and sanctions. And it's happening. Now, let me break this down into little bite-sized pieces. So I want to put people on what I would call, this is my truth bomb, the first truth bomb I'm going to drop on you. When you read the Wall Street Journal, the mainstream media, here's how this multipolar world will be framed. It will be framed as this. Is there a currency that can either, ready, wait for it, beat, topple, dethrone, or otherwise destroy the dollar? And the answer to that is clearly no. And because the answer to that question is no, the articles always end up with the same: the dollar is great, nothing is going to happen. Now I'm going to ask you to entertain the following. Could there be a different question? Could there be another currency that doesn't topple, dethrone the dollar, but could there be other currencies that take small amounts of meaningful market share from the dollar? And that's a very different question.
Yeah, that is a very different question. And I actually really appreciate that that's the direction that you went, because it seems very unbelievable to say, you know, the dollar is going to be dethroned overnight. It's just not. We don't see any indications of that. So as we're shifting, what exactly is it that we're shifting to? So I very much appreciate that perspective on it.
Yeah, you know, and that's so. Look, I want people who are your listeners are listening to you for perspectives that are not the norm. And I want them to be sensitized to the fact that every time they see an article about multipolar currency world, de-dollarization, the question is what we call a straw man or a red herring question. Can it dethrone? And it's a reason to believe that nothing will change. And the reality is the IMF. Now, there's another piece of this. The IMF is hardly anti-American, hardly a communist or overthrow or organization. They've shown very clearly a 17% decline since I got to get the number in my head, since 2000 of the US dollar as a global reserve currency. Now, if you weight that for the value change in the dollar over the period, the drop in dollar use from memory, and I know my numbers are going to be, this number is going to be wrong. It's something like 20 something, 22, 24. So this is the IMF talking. So that is indisputable. Now, that doesn't mean the Chinese yuan is taking over. It doesn't mean that there has been the euro is taking over. What it does mean is that countries have found ways to trade with one another in their native local currencies without having to use the dollar as that transfer mechanism.
Yeah.
And that's real. And it's happening. And there is no way, you can't put this genie back in the bottle. And that is especially true. Understand that the US has sanctions on 30% of the world's nations right now.
That's substantial.
Yeah.
That's substantial.
Yeah, and it's a real problem, because if you make the dollar so hard to use, people stop using it, and that's essentially, and that's Elon Musk is onto this. He's tweeting about this. This is not rocket science. Now, you have a choice. You can live in a world where you believe that dollar primacy is forever, or you can look to the IMF. You can look to historical records. Ray Dalio from Bridgewater, the hedge fund, wrote a whole book on this, calls the major cycles, and he shows how major currencies rise and fall. So you can either live with the fact that the dollar is forever, which nothing we know is, or the dollar, like all currencies in the past, will be subject to change. And, it's up to you. Now, whether you think that change is happening now is a fine debate, but we certainly have enough evidence to show that there is strong desire from nations, from the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, BRICS plus, including the likes of UAE and Saudi Arabia, and they have all come out with statements saying that we would like to not use the dollar. They don't hate it. They just say, look, we don't want to be as dependent on it as we are. And that's where we're going.
Well, and I think that's actually very fair for other countries to look at what's happening, not only politically here in the United States, but with the debt that we have currently, with the very, very poor financial decisions that the United States itself is making, and say, I don't necessarily know that I would like my currency to be tied to the US dollar. I mean, I don't think anybody here in the United States can argue that we have a stable country in any sense, especially coming to the next election. So I understand the perspective that these other countries have, and especially weaponizing sanctions to the extent that the US has. I mean, 30% is no joke. I mean, 30% of the world. And those countries have to do something to survive.
So look, that's a beautiful statement, and let me just fill it out a little bit around the edge.
Mm-hmm.
Because if a nation says it doesn't want to use the dollar, it doesn't mean that it is an enemy of the United States.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they hate us or wish us, the United States, ill will. It simply means they want a better deal. So let me explain. I'm going to take Australia as an example. If Australia wants to buy something from China and pay in RMB, here's what it has to do. It has to take Australian dollars, convert them to United States dollars. That's a single currency transfer hop. They pay money for that, right? And then from US dollars, transfer into Chinese RMB. So you've got two currency hops or transfers, meaning that there's banks that make money on that. So it's expensive.
Yeah.
So take any country. I'm going to just name Kenya because it's a Belt and Road Initiative country. If they can trade the Kenyan shilling, I'm pretty sure I got that right, against the Chinese yuan to purchase things without having to go through the US dollar, it does nothing to do with whether they hate America, even nothing to do with sanctions at this point. It just says we want to buy stuff with less overhead costs. It's not, it's not that they're bad people. So de-dollarization is basically countries trying to get a better deal on foreign trade. And how can you blame them for that? Now, you add sanctions to that, and many people, and when I have this discussion, say, well, the dollar is the most secure currency. And that's true in certain ways. But when you start sanctioning 30% of the world, nations that hold the dollar don't question its value. Well, they do a little bit with all the debt. That's another issue. But what they really question is, if we hold dollar, are we going to be able to spend it on what we want?
Yeah.
So, so people are like, oh, well, the dollar is a immutable force in the world. And nobody has given the dollar a God-given right for monopolizing cross-border trade between neighboring countries that actually don't trade with one another in their own currencies, but only in dollar. You can look at Argentina and Brazil, because the Argentinian peso is always a disaster. But they trade in dollars, and they're neighbors. So, there's no guarantee that has to last forever.
Yeah.
Well, good. This excuse me. This leads me to one of the key aspects that you mentioned, BRICS, earlier. There is a lot of confusion out there. And by the way, guys, just to let you know, I do follow Rick on both Twitter and LinkedIn. So I highly recommend, and we will post all the link for you guys later on. And I saw one of your posts, Rick, about the misconception, which I admit I was wrong in thinking. Well, BRICS countries agreed on the payment system. However, there were some countries inside BRICS that they were refusing to do so. So it's not a fait accompli that there is now, per se, a payment system that is agreed upon in BRICS.
That's correct. And that's an important point, because I see this sort of misinformation, particularly within the cryptocurrency press. And that is that there is a coming BRICS currency, meaning a unique currency built by the BRICS organization that is supported by the BRICS organization. And the last big BRICS meeting, which was last August, it was decided that there would be no BRICS currency, and that the individual BRICS countries would try to use their own currencies in global trade. So then there's sort of a confusion, because Russia recently announced that it wanted to do some kind of BRICS transfer system, meaning a transfer system that allowed currencies from China to go to India or India to go to Russia. Okay, or Brazil. I'm just naming the big countries. Yeah. But that was not technically, it would be a BRICS transfer system, but it's not technically a BRICS currency. Mm-hmm. And, the BRICS nations, and this is now people who, I'm going to say something that are going to make people laugh, because while I've just spoken about a multipolar currency world, I'm going to say one of the reasons why the dollar is useful is that not all currencies are created equal. So the Chinese yuan is pretty stable. The Russian ruble and the Indian rupee. These are problematic currencies. Once you get it, what do you do with it, right? So so these are real problems that BRICS has to overcome, and the lack of a BRICS central bank, the lack of BRICS nations. Remember, when the Eurozone was founded, the individual national central banks ceded control to the European Central Bank. Yeah. So can you imagine Brazil, Russia, India, China, right, ceding control to a BRICS central bank? No way in hell.
No.
So there are fundamental issues that make creating an actual BRICS currency particularly tricky. So I'm not saying, someday, who knows, but for now, when you read about that, it's something to make your ears perk up and say, who is this person who's telling me that a BRICS currency is coming soon, when there are no credible proclamations by any of the BRICS nations in support of this.
It's actually interesting because one of the things that, there's no like brick, right? Like a dollar brick, right? But it seems like these countries are and Russia just came up with it. We have the M-Bridge system that, the Saudis and China and Hong Kong, they've all got, they're all working on this M-Bridge system. But it seems like what they're trying to do is create alternatives to SWIFT. Instead of necessarily creating their own, I have a dollar bill of a brick, right? And is that sort of your take on it? And I equate it to, so the internet, right, is actually one of the most fascinating things that I ever really kind of dove into is, the internet all used to go through the United States. All the internet cables across the world used to go through the United States, every single one of them. And so every single internet communication from every single person in the entire world would go through the United States. Well, we have an NSA that I don't think that anyone thinks isn't listening or isn't watching what's going on. And so what started happening is China, for example, started laying their own internet cables around the United States. And it was interesting because one of the times, I remember this because we did a show on this. There were these Chinese ships that were going through past Alaska. Yeah. And there was this big hubbub of like all this military exercise or whatever. That ship was laying internet cables. But the United States didn't particularly like that it wasn't the go-through for absolutely all of the internet. And so it seems like it's more like that, where they're more or less laying the cables for alternate payments to be made through a system that isn't controlled directly by the United States. Is that sort of the vibe?
You nailed it. Okay, so let me break it down. And your assessment is 100% correct. Look, SWIFT is Society Worldwide for International Financial Transfers, something like that. SWIFT is the global system for transferring money between banks. And just so that people understand, when you send money via SWIFT, you actually don't send cash over, electrically over the wire. It's a very complex system of banks moving money between accounts. Let's stop there. But the important thing to know is that whenever the U.S. sanctions a country like Iran, like Cuba, like Russia, what they do, one of the things to do is you cut their access to SWIFT transfer, meaning that that nation no longer has access to cash transfers via SWIFT. And that's what sanctions are. And so basically, if basically the world has changed because of cryptocurrency and because of modern technological solutions called central bank digital currencies.
Yeah.
The world, and let me talk to crypto people out there for a second. Central bank digital currency, which I know many crypto people hate, exists because of crypto. And for that, we owe crypto a debt. Even that doesn't matter whether you like or hate crypto. But the point is, 25 years ago, a nation, Iran, who had SWIFT sanctions on the U.S., couldn't do anything. They couldn't build their own currency system.
Yeah.
Now the technology exists. You can build your own digital currency. If you can build Bitcoin, why can't a nation build a digital currency? And they are. So these digital currencies will be transferred between nations without using SWIFT. And here's where I'm going to tie in the next thing you said is they're going to use something called M-Bridge, which is a transfer bridge or platform that will connect these nations. And that's in Hong Kong. And it's supported by 5 or 6 central banks with 20 others watching. And that's the future of currency transfer. So while the United States has, under both Trump and all the Republican candidates, including independent RFK Jr., they've all been clear that the United States will not have a digital currency. We've got our allies, the United Kingdom. We've got the European Union, all working to build digital currencies. And of course, no surprise, we've got Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and virtually all of Asia, which is the home of central bank digital currencies, all building them. So
so I have big questions. I have a couple big questions, but you brought up central bank digital currency versus crypto. So I'm personally a fan of Bitcoin. Not many other cryptos. I'm not the biggest fan of pretty much every other crypto. I've got some Ethereum, I got a couple things here and there, but Bitcoin is kind of the like bread and butter here. So I'm a pretty big fan of Bitcoin. I'm less of a fan, I think, that now that all the big governments and big corporations are kind of getting into Bitcoin, but the question that I have that I really want your opinion on is central bank digital currencies, because central bank digital currencies and the crypto world are not the same. You just said it. They're not the same. Central bank digital currency comes with a lot of very big concerns about government influence, concerns about privacy, concerns about, the arguments, right? So the argument is, if there's a central bank digital currency, that's what we're all using. If you have driven your allotted miles for the month, you can't use your card for gas. You know what I mean? So like the very severe level of control that's possible. It's not guaranteed, but that's possible, that comes with central bank digital currencies. And you're right. Like, all the big powers are testing out central bank digital currencies for themselves. And so what is your take fundamentally on central bank digital currencies? Force for good, force for bad.
Wait a minute. Before Rick answers this, the community, our viewers, needs to understand the difference between cryptocurrency and CBDC.
Fantastic.
Rick, can you please because there's a lot of confusion on this. Then that I think
no, absolutely. There's big questions on this.
Look, this is a great segue. Okay, so let me frame this so that people understand where we're going and why. We've just come from three major questions. We started out talking about a multipolar currency world. Then we talked about, BRICS currency isn't going to really fly. And now we're turning it into, then the next following question was, if a BRICS currency isn't going to fly, what are they going to do? And they're going to trade their own currencies, right? But we've got SWIFT, and SWIFT is, of course, blocking these transfers. So they're going to build their own system. So now we're going to look at, in detail, or in understandable detail, what it is that BRICS and other nations, because remember, the UK and the EU are both building central bank digital currencies.
Yes, absolutely.
The EU is actually in phase 2 of their building project. The UK, to be perfectly accurate, is exploring. But both of them both of their central banks have come out with glowing assessment of why society needs central bank digital currency going forward. And this is in direct opposition to the United States, where there is seen no need. Now, what is exactly a central bank digital currency, and why is it not a cryptocurrency? So, number one, what is cryptocurrency? Let's just stop with the two main names that you will hear, and they are Bitcoin and Ethereum. These are currencies that are not issued or backed by a central bank or a government. They are free-floating currencies whose value depends on what people believe they are worth. They are full faith. Okay, so we're okay with that. Now, the next thing is a central bank digital currency, or you will hear me say CBDC, okay, which is, again, a digital currency. And again, interestingly, using much, not all, but some of the same technology that cryptocurrencies use. But the product of a central bank digital currency, let's call it a Hong Kong dollar, because they're working on one, all right? And everybody likes Hong Kong, nice place, or a Brazil real. The Brazil digital real, or the digital Hong Kong dollar, is worth the same as a paper. It is the digital representation of paper money and nothing more. It is issued by the central bank. It is valued. Its value doesn't go up and down. But what it does, it provides a digital version of currency that will be transferred on digital systems that are not SWIFT. And there's a million ways to transfer this, but the way that is the most prevalent right now is this M-Bridge in Hong Kong, which is not imaginary. Now, here's what people have to understand. This M-Bridge project is going live in 2025, probably by the middle of the year. Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa all have central bank digital currencies in pilot. I'm going to say for sure, with obviously China's is already, I have the wallet, I can use it in Shanghai infrequently, but China has it, Russia has it for sure. They're launching officially next July. India is certainly in pilot, and Brazil is also in pilot phase. It's only South Africa that's got a special kind of digital currency for bank transfers. They've tried it, and I'm not sure where they are right now in actual rollout. But, for people have to understand that this is not, this will happen in 20 years. This is happening in the next year or two.
Well, so let me ask an extra question, because you're sort of going through what the difference is between crypto and CBDC, central bank digital currency. A lot of people also have this the question of how is a central bank digital currency different than basically, because most people use apps or credit cards or debit cards or whatever. They don't actually have physical money anymore. So how is a central bank digital currency different than what's happening right now with people's money, where they have a debit card and then they use that?
Sure. And that's a great question. So when and if, let's just use Europe, because Europe is like the United States. where credit cards are commonly used.
Yeah.
Unlike, for example, me, where I live in China, we have digital wallets. Okay, I have a digital wallet for WeChat or for Alipay, and I use that to make my payments. Okay, so much will depend on how they design the digital currency for use, but a central bank digital currency can be used with a credit card. The nation of Kazakhstan connected the central bank digital currency that they have issued and working. I know it's a small country, but yes, it's an important one. Big trading partner with China, and you can expect cross-border trade in digital currency within the next year between these two. But you can use it with a credit card. You can use it with your Google or Apple Pay account, or your bank or other will issue a new kind of digital wallet that people can probably use QR codes like WeChat and Alipay and pay. So there's a million ways to use it. But let's go back to the bigger question that you asked before, which is basically, is central bank digital currency spyware?
Yeah. Or
Put on by the
controlware.
government.
Now, 1984, man. 1984.
Yeah. And the answer is, this is complete bull.
Okay.
Let me explain why it's complete bull. Because the people who most promote this are the people from the crypto community who see central bank digital currency as the greatest threat to the digital, to their crypto world. And what is absolutely disingenuous is that crypto people who will tell you that cryptocurrency is safe, it's secure, it's private, will then look at the same technologies being put to work for the government, and when they lay them out in similar manners, it's nothing but spyware. And you know, it is disingenuous because the crypto community will not give the government any credit for being able to design a system that maintains a reasonable level of people's payment privacy. And that's simply wrong. Now, look, I get that people are not fans of government right now. I understand
Understandably
that.
So. I think we're not really either.
I get that. So government is not exactly anybody's best friend right now. So we look to see bad things. But the reality is the policy and design people at the central bank of the European Central Bank or the Bank of England, they're not out to spy on and control their people. And they have technological solutions that allow them to build reasonable amounts of privacy into currencies and to make it not spyware. That exists. That's not imaginary. And what's ironic is that the same people who are telling you crypto is great, it's private, you should use that, will look at the same technology deployed by the government and say it's a disaster, the sky is falling, and that's just fundamentally wrong on multiple levels. But anyway, so let me be clear. And this is, I'm going to use my recent comments that got picked up by one of the crypto services. I said, look, the European Central Bank has made every effort to make a private, secure European digital euro. All right. But I said, and that's great. They're off to the right start. But I use the expression trust but verify. We then have to look at the code and see what they want to build. So trust them, but verify that what they're doing is correct. I'm not saying to accept the word of any government at face value without looking at the code and looking at the design schematics of what they're building. So that's only sane. Anyway.
So it will be a foregone conclusion to say that Russia, for example, will move forward with using cryptocurrency?
Absolutely. Look, Russia is I know that Russia is nobody's nobody's a big fan of Russia right now. So my job is to report objectively on what Russia is doing without giving people the impression that I am pro, supporting, or otherwise taking a side in what is a disastrous conflict. Okay. But objectively, I have to report that Russia, as the most heavily sanctioned country in the world right now, is looking to use other currencies for trade, which is why it sells tremendous amounts of oil to India, and it sells the oil in rupee. Okay, so that's the way it is. So they've got rupee, and then they had a problem not knowing what to do with the rupee, and then they found a way to use the rupee to build a new Russian fishing fleet in using India factories to do it. Okay, fine. But Russia has already used cryptocurrency for certain cross-border transactions, and it is stated that this I can't remember. It was June or July of 2025. They're going to roll out officially. That's their date for the official rollout of their central bank digital currency, and their stated reason is to have this currency to facilitate trade with other nations with central bank digital currencies. So Kazakhstan has a central bank digital currency. Belarus is going to have one. China obviously already has one. So we're going to see things get real. Okay, people right now think of central bank or CBDC as an imaginary thing. It's going to get really real within the next 6 or 8 months. Okay.
Too many countries right now are pursuing it. I mean, it's every major power and then a whole bunch of powers that are not the major powers. Everyone is pursuing it right now, and it's in trial phases in so many places. And also, countries are not. So Ray Dalio, you mentioned him earlier. He's absolutely one of my favorites, and I forgot the name of his book, but it's fantastic. Where he talks about the cycles. And one of the things that is very, very clear is that every fiat currency fails. We talk about that all the time. Every single fiat currency fails. And so since that's the case, the United States is not stupid. I mean, the United States government may do some very stupid things or very short-sighted things, but it's not stupid. The governments of the world can see that this is changing. And one of the things that I think China does particularly well and the US does very poorly is looking to the future decades ahead of time and seeing how to manage a situation, not for the short term, but for the long term. And so I definitely agree. I am in the camp that is not a fan of central bank digital currencies, because I'm in the camp that does not love the way that the government of the world have taken their people, especially the United States, quite frankly. But I will say it does seem to be an inevitability because all of the countries are pushing for it right now. They've invested heavily in it, and it seems to be coming. I think you're right.
Well, look, you have to understand something that's key, and that is central bank digital currency solves a very important problem for us. And that is, how are we going to pay in the digital world?
Yeah.
And this is a basic argument, and people from the Bitcoin fans will say, well, Bitcoin is how we pay in the digital world. And I'm like, well,
yeah, but no one's paying in Bitcoin.
Yeah, everybody's hodling. They're not paying.
Right.
And the reality is, with the Bitcoin price volatility, it's impossible to know what anything actually costs when your underlying payment method may go up 10 or 15%, per day. So that makes it hard. So, countries aren't pursuing central bank digital currency solely because they hate the dollar. They're doing it to solve real problems. And one of the real problems that nations have is, what's an efficient way to send money digitally? Now, somebody listening in says, well, we've got credit cards. To which I reply the following. Every merchant that you purchase something, whether it's you go to Starbucks and you buy a coffee, or whether it's going on Amazon, they all have fees.
Yeah.
So
yeah, they sure do. They sure do.
Yeah. So,
Sorry,
it's
it's
really
terrible.
hard. So credit, look, let me just tell people do not understand how expensive the credit card fees are. And if you're living in the United States,
I understand.
right now,
right?
right?
Yeah, it's for real. It's real.
So it's real. So look, if you're living in the United States right now, 2.3% of the US's entire GDP is being transferred to banks for payment costs. And wait for it, it's around 1.1% of all of US GDP is being spent in credit card charges. So we've given Visa and MasterCard, a duopoly, access, direct, open the door. Here you go. Here's 1.1% of the United States GDP poured directly into Visa and MasterCard's bank account. And then we thank them for it.
Yeah.
Like, you're the greatest, Visa and MasterCard. We love you. What, are you kidding me? We're being robbed.
Yeah.
And the world knows this. And the digital euro, the European Central Bank has been perfectly upfront saying one of the reasons we want to build this is that we're tired of Visa and MasterCard, American companies, providing the only trans or intra-euro payment system. We want our own. And who can blame them? So
I mean, that's fair. That's fair. Okay.
Yeah.
Every time I see that, I'm like, man, do you really need 3% of whatever someone just paid? Like, do I really need to on every single transaction? It's insanity.
Especially
it's insanity. Look, I get it. We're all on social media. I have Square accounts and I have and I have the other one, Stripe, so somebody buys a subscription to my newsletter. And and because I do such a small volume of business, yes, I'm tiny, right? I admit that, folks. I mean, my card charges are like 4 or 5%, and I laugh and cry every time I get it because I want a digital currency. I want a way for people to pay me for free. Yeah. And by the way, I have that in China. WeChat and Alipay. You want to pay me? I send the money digitally. It's smooth, clean, and free. It's great.
Yeah.
That's super interesting. Okay, so I must change the subject really quickly because this is something that I'm interested in everyone's opinion on. And you are in China right now, correct?
Yeah, sure.
What is the reality of the Chinese economy? We hear that it is collapsing. Oh my God, it's the end. I don't buy that for 1 second. So what is the reality currently of the Chinese economy and where do you see it going forward in the near future?
Okay, so let me tell listeners who don't know me, I've lived in China for 15 years. I came to China with the global financial crisis. I was a banker for years, and when the banking jobs disappeared, I came here and I worked for IBM, and I worked teaching at an MBA school as an MBA school professor here for an American or an international university. But this is sad, okay? So the answer is, I'm going to tell it in a story. So I get on the phone with my brother from time to time, my brother will say, well, you're watching and listening to Chinese propaganda, to which I reply, well, look, my Mandarin skills aren't good enough to allow me to watch the Chinese news. I do read the English language Chinese papers. But I said, whatever propaganda you think I got in China, you got it just as bad.
Yep, absolutely.
In the United States.
It's both sides.
What is it? So China, number one, It is not collapsing. Go to YouTube and you'll find the videos. China is collapsing in 60 days. China is going.
I know.
You know. So first of all, no one should hope. I'm going to tell this logically to people out there. Whoever you are and however much you dislike China, and that's fine, that's your own personal belief, you should not hope that a nation of 1.4 billion people collapses or otherwise ends up in as a failed state.
Absolutely
It didn't work out very well for Yugoslavia. I ask you all to look back onto the Yugoslavian experience. Now, what's the reality on the ground in China? We are not having the same pre-COVID booming times. China economy grew at more than a decade at over 8%. That's gone. It has a GDP growth this year of 5%, which is by all measures, a reasonable amount of GDP growth. You know,
sure,
Europe and the US would be happy with 5%.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're not anywhere close to that.
So, and it is clear. I live in Shanghai, right on one of the major shopping districts. It's clear that retail sales are down. People do not feel that they have money in their pocket that they're going to go blow. But here is what's not happening. The real estate crisis is not causing the collapse of China as we know it. The government is managing it in piecemeal fashion. It's not pretty to watch, but they are slowly working it out. And yes, it's a problem for people who bought these apartments and are still paying they buy the apartments, they have a mortgage on them, and the apartment isn't being built, but they still have to pay the mortgage. That's painful.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Of course.
No doubt about it. But it is not causing the collapse of China, and that's the important thing. So, is this a recession or a period of? It's hard to label this a recession when objectively, you can't call it a recession when you still got 5% growth. But is it a period of slower growth for China? Absolutely. Do people feel they have less money in their pocket? Absolutely. Is China collapsing? No. And that's an absurdity to even report this. And for all the YouTube, I'll use the Chinese expression, Jianpansha, which means keyboard warriors. Who are telling people that everything is a disaster. That's just wrong, and I think it's just in very bad form. You know, I want these people to be held accountable for reports that say on YouTube, China's collapsing in 30 days. Well, that was a year ago you wrote that. Well, why are you still out there spewing this crap? And I think that's wrong. But anyway, that's because I'm old.
All right, let's shift to. I'd like to have your insights into what do you foresee as far as, let's say, the U.S. next presidential elections, and no, it's not about the elections. That is not. I don't care for that. What I care about the most, Rick, is where do you see the China-U.S. relations moving forward with the next American presidential elections? Doesn't matter who end up winning. And specifically regarding trade, where do you see that moving forward?
So I'm going to, so as a disclaimer, I normally don't talk politics. So regarding the election, I have no horse race. But I think that's the way you pose the question. And I like it. You slipped this in, David. It's very wise. You said, does it matter? So what we can look back on is let's look back at history in the Trump years and let's look at the Biden years. And that's a left-right cultural divide. But the reality is that whether you were a Biden administration official or whether you were a Trump administration official, both of them believed in sanctioning China and putting tariffs on China. So my take is that this concept that one party or the other is going to change the The relationship with China is just not going to happen. Relationships with China are hardwired. Bad relationships with China are hardwired into the American system right now.
Yeah.
China is taking the blame for job exports and a lot of other things. And I'd like to point out many economists who said, look, don't blame China for the jobs. It was your private equity guys. It was your venture capitalists who bought the company, pushed all the production off to China.
Yep.
And they were heralded as heroes during the Obama administration, the Clinton administration, and the start of the Reagan administration. So the real guy who is to blame for all the job losses is Jack Welch, who put everything on quarterly. Jack Welch, the former GE CEO, who came out with the concept that all public companies, they matter only as much as their quarterlies, and that decimated both basic research and R&D in most of America's corporate sector. And it was the logic that said, send all the jobs to China. But that's another issue. We can cover that. But basically, I don't see that the election will make much of a difference. I see nothing but further bad relationships between China and the United States. I will fault particularly the current Secretary of State, whom I believe has not been particularly productive and has
that's such a gentle way to say that.
That's a gentle way, Rick.
We love that's so gentle. That's so kind.
So I mean, so let's just leave it there. I don't think he's been particularly effective, even in the sense that I think the Biden administration probably had other goals or other things they would have liked to have done with China, but by basically shutting down the China-U.S. relationship and making it so that it's news that we're even talking again, that's that's not productive. And so that's all I got for you. The state may look. The state of this relation is sad. One final thought on this: U.S.-China relations impact the entire globe.
Yeah.
And with the chip bans slowing the rollout of AI globally, with the U.S. and China's inability to get along and agree on so many things, it is slowing development down for the world. And we will all prosper. The world will prosper if the U.S. and China can at least stabilize the relationship and learn how to get along with one another.
Well, so kind of diving into that a little bit further, because, we have the issue of Taiwan. We have, the very, very much, very aggressive sort of anti-China rhetoric that we have here. And you're absolutely right. When it's talked about here, it's talked about, oh, China took our jobs. What do you mean took? Did they come over here and take it out of our hands and drag it back to China? No, they were handed these jobs. They were handed cheap and very often very toxic, very, very polluting to the environment. I mean, a lot of these jobs, companies went over there so basically they could do whatever they wanted. And we did that collectively. The large corporate interests here did that. And then we're somehow surprised when all the jobs went over there and they're not here anymore, and we built up their economy with our US dollars, and now we're mad at them for that?
Yeah.
I mean, who did that? Who was the driver for that, right? Obviously, it was US.
Who's the driver? Yeah, right? And look, it is a collective. It is a collective hypnosis that makes people, forget this. This is
right.
You wanted stock returns to pump up. Yeah. You wanted to pay these CEOs absurd amounts of money for moving the jobs offshore. That was rewarded. That was what was the currency of the time. And now we have this, mass amnesia that seems to forget 1990, because 1990 is so long ago, nobody can possibly remember it, David. You know.
I was very, very young.
Well, David and I remember it well.
I remember that.
You know, but anyway, it's, you know, so look, it's an unfortunate situation, and I always hope every day, I hope for better relationships between China and the U.S. and sanity to return.
I do too.
That would be great. So,
well, I actually have if I can
sure.
for a second.
Well, yeah.
I know we're nearing our end of the show, but I have this question because it's very relevant, I think, exactly to what we're talking about, and that is, you know, you're talking about the slowdown, basically the slowdown globally, because U.S. and China are kind of in this very odd space right now, that the narrative is primarily coming out of the United States, right? The U.S. is trying to slow down China, and one of the ways that the U.S. has historically derailed countries is to get into a conflict, is to drag them into some kind of conflict. But I'm interested overall, because the U.S., the only economy that could dethrone the United States is China. And so I'm interested in your take on sort of the interplay there, and what the real reasons are that there is this very, very anti-China narrative instead of working on cooperation. You know, is the US fundamentally more concerned that China is actually going to overtake the United States? And is that really the core, the root issue that the US is facing here? And is it legitimate? Is it a legitimate concern?
Yeah. So here's the answer to your question. These are going to be the briefest answers I've given. The United States is terrified that China, as the world's number 2 economy and as a major technological power, will surpass the United States in GDP or other measures. And those other measures are not always money, but they are world influence, technological prowess. And you have to imagine if statements from our Trade Secretary, Gina Raimondo, we want the Europeans to join in with us to delay and stifle Chinese innovation and development. I mean, what would the U.S. do if Europe tomorrow said we are working actively to stifle U.S. growth and development and technological? It'd be World War III, But yes. So the answer is yes. The United States is actively pursuing a containment policy for China, trying to contain its technological prowess. Look, I'm a tech guy. I work and write about technology, and that isn't going to stop. And all of the efforts to ban the sale of chips or other technologies to China it can only delay a nation that graduates 2 million plus STEM graduates every year. They're running a national, when David and I might remember, I remember clearly, I grew up during the US space race. I became an engineer because of it. Everybody in the United States in 1965, 66 was encouraged to become an engineer or a mathematician. And that's what it is in China right now. They're using that same concept of focusing all of the nation on science and technology. They learned from the United States. We did it in the 60s with the space race. So that's, you can't delay China's ascendancy for technology, no matter how much you sanction them, ban them. You can just slow it down, but even the slowing down is only a little bit. But that's what it's about. So I don't like it. I try to report objectively on where it's at, and that's it.
And that's part of the reality where things are. So, Richard, where can our viewers find your work and all that?
Your viewers are wonderful. I love them all, and thank you so much for all your feedback after the last time we chatted.
Of course.
I recommend to all of you, I have a beautiful newsletter that goes out only once a week, and it covers mostly all the stuff about central bank digital currency, the M-Bridge, and all of those currency wars, this multipolarity stuff. That goes out once a week. It's Rich Turrin. It'll be in the show notes. .substack.com. I'd love to see you over there and subscribe, because I deal with these issues of multipolar currency all the time. I'm also, of course, on Twitter. You can find me, and of course on LinkedIn. So I'm available. I write back. A couple of people wrote to me from the program, David, and they said, they wrote to me, and when I wrote them back, one of their comments was, "We were surprised you wrote back." Yes, I write back. It's no big deal. It's my pleasure. So please write. Please sign up for my newsletter. I look forward to hearing from you on Twitter or on LinkedIn. On Twitter, I have a daily tweet called De-Dollarization Daily, where I tackle de-dollarization articles every day. So I look forward to hearing from you all. And thank you so much for having me on. I love being here, and I love chatting with you and your audience.
Of course, yeah.
Thank you.
And guys, we will put, in addition to, we have in the link here on the screen, but we will put also the links to Richard, all platforms, in the description, so you'll see them there. And I also have another picture here that I would like to share with you guys, is Richard, China's digital currency revolution and cash. This is the key if you guys want to learn a lot about the financial world. And this is why the topics we addressed today, that sort of, we want you to hear it from the expert himself. And like I said earlier, and you guys know me by now, I am not somebody who sugarcoat things. Rick, it's someone I trust. So this is why I reached out to him, and he was kind enough to respond to us. So I can't thank you enough, Rick, for carving out time for us here. Truly appreciate you, man.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you both so much for having me.
You are most welcome, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.